Hi guys, I hope you're well, and in today's video we're going to be building a Ruined Temple Diorama. Now I've got no idea how this will go, but I've had a look on Google for some reference images and we're just going to take a stab at it. So to begin with, we're going to just take a piece of scrap MDF that I've got lying around in the studio and some high density foam which I'm going to use as a base. And we're just going to play with some random, very abstract shapes. I'm going to use some of these vitamin C tablet tubes, which I've got an idea to maybe use as some pillars. And also this crazy little skull ornament that we'll make use of later. So then we're going to take some Gorilla Wood glue and then begin to stick down our base so we've got a nice usable surface to work from. Now what to do with this skull? So I've taken some initial measurements and decided on the approximate height of everything. Now I'm just beginning to cut out some walls that we're going to use to start to build our structure. And then we've got our tubes which we've cut down to size. We're just going to take off any rough edges with a piece of sandpaper so we can get them in a state that's nice and clean and good to go. So everything's feeling pretty solid and stuck down now. We're just going to flip this over and use the base of the diorama as a guide to cut the foam from underneath. Now it's important to watch your fingers, obviously, whenever using a sharp blade. Very easy to slip, and I've done many times. But, always pay attention to what you're doing. And at this stage, it's not too important if the sides are a little rough. We can always hide those with a bit of beading along the side. And next we decided to add a step to create a little feature, add a point of interest. Some of the reference images I looked at, they had either some steps or a crumbling pool, or I'm just playing around with some shapes at this stage, lining things up, trying to get an idea of where we're going to go. Now I decided to cut this skull to make it more easy to work with, and we've got two different types of beading that I picked up from the hardware store, and I thought these might be quite nice to just use in as little details. Just tack them in. Now we had a little problem with this skull. As I was cutting it down, we had a little chip across the top, but what seems like a problem at first, I think we can probably work with and make something happen cool. Now this next stage, I decided to create a template so I could accurately mark and measure the distances whilst keeping everything quite loose and still movable without committing to sticking it down. And this was really helpful. I quickly found whilst I was playing around with shapes and just putting things together, it was very easy to nudge something and suddenly the measurements didn't make sense anymore. And then I took some beading and began to run this around the base of the walls. This gives a little bit of detail and visual interest. And just begin to have some fun. for this next section, I wanted to use the skull but somehow recess it into this top section. So I drew around the base. So I've got a reference point as to which to carve to, somewhere in the middle. And we hollowed that out with a craft knife, and then just playing around with some additional shapes, just getting a sense how the rest of the facade might look. Then we glued this cut down skull into place to another piece of foam that is going to again create another little mini base to create this small focal point that I decided to create, just using some of this beading and the wood glue. And again, this wood glue really allows me to work pretty quickly, have a degree of flexibility if I need to make changes once I've got a little bit further down the process, but once it sticks really, really solidly. So I've got these little beads online somewhere, off eBay, I think. I think I got a whole bag of 50 of them for a couple of quid. They're a little larger than GW scale, but I found them to be really nice to use as carved skulls. You have to look around. There's quite a few different options with different levels of detail, but these ones were the best ones that I found, and once painted up and washed and dry brushed and with a bit of attention paid to them, they end up looking really good actually. And on a little side note, I think it's worth mentioning that whilst I am taking some care to wipe off the excess glue, at this stage it's really not that important because the porous nature of the foam that I'm using tends to absorb a lot of the excess glue, which is at this stage really, really useful. And again, if you like what you see, if you would like to support the channel in any way, get involved in the comment section, leave a like, subscribe, really helps. And now using a ruler, I just marked some horizontal parallel lines. And we're going to use this as the mortar in between our bricks. Now, whether this is historically accurate, I'm not sure really, but as a visual language, to me it represents bricks. So this is what I went for, and you can just have some fun with this really. As you can see here, it's not really rocket science. I'm just using a blunt pencil to carve and create deformations in the stonework. And putting everything together now, it's all starting to take shape. I also decided to add an additional piece of detail with this other piece of beading. I'm just going to stick that to the edge. And again, slowly piecing all the different separate elements together. Now this was rather fiddly. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but in reflection, gluing the skulls down solidly first so there wasn't any movement may have been a better idea, but you live and learn. And now I'm just beginning to define the shapes of the bricks a little. Just using my craft knife to cut out the shapes and then using the edges of my finger to just roughen up the edges a little, make them feel more broken down, more ruined. And now things are definitely starting to take shape. But I think there's one or two little details that we can add. So I decided to add some more beading to further frame this skull feature. I think it just finishes off quite nicely. And again, I'm really just making it up as I go along at this stage. There is no plan, just going with what feels right, trusting your instinct, and letting your creativity flow. And now comes a really fun part. Now, in between making things, I'm often out in the parks going for walks, and I always take a bag with me and always try to keep an eye out for any little interesting dead trees, leaves, plants, little natural structures that I can at some point put together in my work. And I managed to collect a whole bunch of dead ivy, which worked out really well for this. And I just began to stick it down, try to find a sort of balanced composition, and it really starts to give me a feel of a ruined temple that's been overgrown for thousands of years. And then I'm going to come in with my trusty PVA and water mixture, applied through an atomizer. And this is just to seal everything ready for paint. And after a quick mist of grey primer, I'm coming in with my airbrush loaded with black and just picking out some of the more shadowy areas that I feel would exist in recess and naturally be darker. And I kept all the little offcuts of my endeavours, and I'm just going to use these to create some fallen bricks over time as the building is degraded. Some of the rubble will have naturally fallen over and collected around the base. And this begins to really mesh the roots with the building itself. And then just picking out with some natural stones and some dried leaf matter, beginning to further create that illusion of everything just growing together. And now here's a really interesting step. Again, just some dried leaf matter, small roots, leaves and twigs and sticks. And I'm just breaking these up into manageable pieces. And then I've got some really fine soil to further add some different levels of texture. And then what I'm going to do is just come in with some really cheap white glue, PVA, give everything a good healthy dose of that, and then come in with some paint, some burnt umber, some green, and sort of lighter brown, a sort of sienna colour, and then some yellow. Just mix in a little water, and again, I'm really just beginning to play with some colours. These are just paints that I had to hand. There's no specific recipe to this. And begin to mix this whole gloopy, gunky mixture together. And what this will do, this will provide the basis for our ground structure. So any extra textures we create in this, it can be reasonably coarse, will really further allow us to create a dynamic forest floor. I just wanted to change the colour a little, so I added a little more brown. And that sort of gave me really that khaki, earthen colour that I was after. And I just begin to apply this with a palette knife all around the edge of the base. Again, just mixing it all together, gunking it all in. There's no real plan to this, but just get it everywhere. I mean, when I looked at a lot of reference pictures of jungles and forest floors, I was actually amazed at how dense and overgrown everything was. There wasn't almost any stretch of forest floor which hadn't had some form of life over the years grow into it. It seems like a constant battle for space in a forest. And for this next section, I've gathered a range of artificial plants over my time, and this is a topiary ball from the local garden centre, for example. But I also found some really good artificial plants at the local aquatic store. These are aquarium plants. They come in different leaf patterns. And then these ferns, I think I picked up online somewhere. I think they're used for weddings, but reasonably realistic. And then with a quick prime, we can begin to start assembling some of our little plants. So I just cut some small sections off these artificial ferns that I've got here. I'm going to do a little dot of hot glue. Just begin to place the bases of these little pieces of plant into a rough shape. You've got a degree of flexibility, but you have to be reasonably quick with the hot glue. Take care not to burn yourself. And we continue that process with these leaves that I've painted already. Just giving them a quick 2 tones of green with an airbrush. I'm just picking off the leaves and with the same process, gluing these together. Now they're really not neat at this stage, but again, we can hide most of that excess glue. And then I'm going to come in with some black wash and some brown wash that I'm just going to mix together. And these are both homemade mixtures, just using some inks, some acrylic medium and some water with a drop of washing up liquid. And I've turned the model through 90 degrees, so I'm going to utilize gravity to help me get that mixture into all those little nooks and crannies, all the crevices, and just really laying this on relatively thickly. And then I'm going to take some green, load this up into my airbrush, and I've just, using drawing pins, just pinned these to a piece of polystyrene. And I'm just giving these a quick mist of colour, taking care to try to hit all the surfaces. Those pesky leaves can have many places where the paint doesn't seem to go, but with a bit of attention and patience, you'll get there. And then I've just changed the mixture slightly, added a lighter variant, some more yellow. And it's just hitting the edges of the leaves here now, just to give a nice little gradient. And I've just taken some brown mix of paint. It's a combination of some sienna colours and some umber colours. And I'm just starting to paint in all the root structures. Again, not being too neat or careful at this stage, just getting some colour onto everything and giving the roots a good solid base so that we can further work into them later. And here we're just taking our craft knife and removing the hot glue from our plastic surface, and then with some more hot glue attaching them onto our forest floor. Now, I will say this process was a real change of speed. I'm a relatively patient person, but this took forever. And then I'm coming in with some PVA glue and just popping this on some of the roots. And then I'm going to take a homemade mixture of some flock that I've created, and this utilizes various degrees of coarseness within the flock just to give a little natural variation. And I've applied this all over the model. And next we're coming in with just a brown grey mixture of paint. I'm just dry brushing this all over the root structures, and again this really creates a nice bit of tonal variation and adds to that weathered look. Then I'm going to take some lichen, not really sure, it's a strange one, but lichen I'll go with. Just popping these into some corners and other parts around the model to create a little more diversity in the plant life. And what I found was that it was important not to have too many of the same plant next to each other. So I just took my time and slowly applied lichen and other plant materials where it felt right, And then I'm going to take some dried roots that I've collected. Often I use as basing on models just to create that extra little bit of something special. And I'm just slowly taking my time weaving these in and out of the existing root structures. And again, this really allows for a fantastic variation in size and further sells that illusion of scale. And then I'm taking my airbrush, just topped up with a little green, and I'm just going to lightly mist over everything. And what this provides is almost a filter which unifies everything together, pulls all the colours into a sort of unifying hue. And whilst this step may seem really subtle, it's absolutely crucial in the overall look of the piece. And next I trimmed off any excess roots and created some sides with some MDF that I had lying around. And I've just loosely traced the outline of the shapes that I've made, glued this together. And don't worry too much if the joints aren't too perfect. You can always sand them down and fill them a little. And then once this is all done, we're going to give it a nice coat of black. Just tape all this down just to set everything into place. And then just pop some pins in for added security. And so here we are. The journey is almost complete. I began with nothing, an idea, a feeling. but with a healthy dose of creativity, some patience, and some trial and error, I've managed to stumble my way through. Remember, as a new channel, I can do with all the support I can get, so if you would like to see more videos like this, let me know in the comment section below. Smash the like button, share it with someone who might also find it interesting, and subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest videos. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and really helps to support the channel. To let your imagination be free, we have to dare to make mistakes, to journey into the unknown. On this occasion, that journey led me deep into the jungle to discover this.